without wasting much of time and getting directly for our session, I'll quickly request our Professor Nirmala, a coordinator for DST Center for Policy Research at Punjab University, Chandigarh, to formally welcome our elite audience. Over to you, Professor
Okay.
Nirmala.
Thank you, Dr. Radhika, for opening the floor, and good afternoon to all. On behalf of DST Center for Policy Research, Punjab University, Chandigarh, it is a great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all. Mr. Deepak Das Gupta, Director and Head CII Mumbai, who has been so kind to accept to come here and join us here to give a talk. Faculty members, researchers, students, ladies and gentlemen. So uh, our vice chancellor, he was to join to give a special address, but somehow he had a very urgent meeting, and so he could not join us. But he was really enthusiastic to join. So on the onset, I just would like to mention a few lines about our center, which was set up in 2014 under DST, and we are working under three mandates: promoting public-private partnership for R&D, then for identifying policy gaps for stimulation of private sector investment in R&D, and identifying and promoting areas for generation of intellectual property rights. And just as I mentioned, Dr. Deepak Das Gupta, he's working with CII, and CII is works to create and sustain an environment conducive for the development of India, and for partnering industry, government, and also civil society through advisory and consultation processes. So it also works for conclusive development and inclusive of skill development, then sustainable development, and also empowerment of women. And we are very fortunate to have Mr. Deepak Das Gupta to talk about whether he's a very experienced person in industrial policy formulation and also promoting R&D and technology. He will today deal with about the need of a targeted policy framework for spurring innovation and collaborative R&D. And in the present world, in this competitive world, it is very essential to have very strong policies and their implementation, so that the researchers can take their research forward for commercialization, which can strengthen the economy of a country. And we look forward to a very stimulating talk. Now I would like Ms. Mamta Bhardwaj, Senior Scientist C from our center, to introduce our esteemed speaker.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for handing over the platform to me. So, before we move to the next session, I take the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Deepak Das Gupta. So, Mr. Deepak Das Gupta is the director and head of CII Neroji's Godrej Center of Manufacturing Excellence. He is an instrumentation engineer and holds master degree in management and economics of innovation from Kalmar University of Technology, Sweden. He is a professional in the domain of knowledge ecosystem building, formulation of industrial policy, promotion of R&D, and technology in the areas of manufacturing, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Prior to joining CII, he has headed CII Innovation and Entrepreneurship Department in Delhi and CII Maharashtra State Office in Mumbai. He has successfully established an enterprise innovation maturity framework to implement structured innovation processes within firms, which was instrumental to receive CII Industrial Innovation Award as Top Innovation Driven Indian Enterprise. He has been associated with Global Innovation Index from 2011 to 17 and has contributed in sharing knowledge platforms pertaining to India. He has co-authored many chapters in GII report, which were jointly published by WIPO, INSEAD, and Cornell University. He has worked in partnership with NITI Aayog, Government of India, for the Innovation Cluster Development Program under the aegis of National Innovation Council. He has been an active member of various public and private policy advocacy groups like National Council of Science Museum for creating innovation hubs across India, Technical Advisory Committee under DSIR, National Science Technology Entrepreneurship Development Board to review technology business incubators, AICTE for Innovation and Entrepreneurship Capacity Building, DSP's Committee on R&D and Innovation Indicators in National S&T System and Policy Implications, Maharashtra State Innovation Society, and governing body of Technology Innovation Hub at IIT Bombay. So, sir, your profile is very inspiring and extended. We wish you achieve more success and make it further extended. So, thank you again for agreeing to share your expertise and thoughts with us. Over to you, sir.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction, and I thank Professor Nirmala for arranging this particular session. I think it is very important and very pertinent for industry and academia to meet and discuss on such issues which actually help and create a win-win for all the stakeholders. So as we discussed, today's topic that I'm going to speak about is need for a targeted policy framework for spurring innovation and collaborative R&D. So what I'll do in this presentation is, in the first part of the presentation, I will talk about the policy on innovation. And then in the second part of the presentation, I will briefly touch upon the collaborative R&D. In the innovation presentation, I will try to create or show the audience about the transformation or the evolution of the innovation paradigm over few decades, and try to see how this particular change in innovation paradigm actually give us certain direction to create certain policy for the future. And also we will see certain programs which has been created with the current policy direction with, all across the world. Taking certain examples of certain countries like Japan and in Europe, and see how these actually programs are actually contributing to this particular innovation journey. So with that, I will start my presentation. But before that, let me just check if my slides are very clear to you. Is it clear?
Yes, sir, they are fine.
Okay. So I'll just switch off my video so that there is no problem. Okay. So before we go into the policy landscape of innovation, let us understand what innovation is. But I mean, at this point of time, everybody is familiar with this word innovation. But it is always good to see this word again and again, because it is evolving, and it is actually taking into different shape and form as we move forward. And it will be very important to do the policy if we understand this word properly. So is innovation an invention or discovery? Is innovation and commercialization? Is innovation an intellectual property? Is it a process? Is it a research and is it R&D, or is it business model? So I can go on like this, asking what innovation is, but we can safely say innovation is kind of a combination of all of the above in various sequence and forms at the global, national, regional, industrial, and firm level. So when we talk about innovation, we have to combine all of this. And if you see on the right hand side, I have one coordinate, like one x-axis, y-axis with success and time. If I plot innovation here, you can see innovation as a function. We may think it is a linear function, but it is not a linear function. It is a non-linear function, because you cannot predict the success of an innovation over time. So let us see some of the keywords which are associated with innovation, and these keywords come into different literature, into different whenever we formulate policy and different other places related to innovation. The first is actors. Who are these actors? Actors are industry, academia, government, institutions, different agencies, NGOs. So all they contribute to innovation. Institutions could be R&D, financial, legal, regulatory, policy. So we have to take into account all these institutions when we talk about innovation. So then there are words like partnership, association, which comes under collaboration. So we are also talking about collaboration here. Then we talk about novelty, inventive step, industrial applicability. I think all of you know it is related to IPR, which is also part of innovation. And lastly, but very important, is commercial value. Until unless something, the actors, after their collaboration creating an IPR, if they cannot commercialize, then probably we can say it's not a successful innovation. So these are all important. So there are different definitions of innovation in the literature if we go through, but generally we take the Oslo Manual as one of the standard definition. But if you go to any definition, it will actually talk about the previous things which I told you. So Oslo Manual, the new definition which I have listed down, the first definition. Let me just put laser. The first definition also it's from the Oslo Manual 2018. It also talks about the same. So I'll not go to the definition, but this is just for your reference. So now let's see. After we understood what is innovation and we brushed up our idea of innovation. So let us see what are the direction and innovation policy can take. It is extremely important to understand. In the present context, in all the innovations that we see, it has a direction to or a goal to create economic growth. These are designed to create economic growth based on industrial mass production and mass consumption. And these are resource and energy intensive and produces massive waste. Now I'm talking about not only like incremental innovation, I'm talking about radical innovations also. So there are huge amount of waste which is created and huge amount of energy which is wasted, and we are in, and you know how what is the mass consumption and mass production paradigm which gives us profit, but we have to debate whether it's the right direction. So what is the desired direction of innovation? So desired direction of innovation talks about designing to regulate the socio-technical system change leading to economic growth, inclusive and sustainable, has low impact on the environment. This is extremely important. And as we go forward and also in this presentation, we will see how the innovation landscape is changing from the present to the desired. So I will talk about it a little bit and try to understand what that means. So you can see the evolving policy landscape for innovation. I have just given three items which I can call phases, and you can see it starts from 1940, so it's several decades and spans till date. So you can see the first phase, which you can call innovation for growth. It's a dominant till 80s, and then it is there, but it is active and it is present, but it is not a dominant phase. The second was in National Innovation System. We all heard about this National Innovation System. So some point of time from 80s, it became dominant, and there was a lot of research and there were a lot of literature which has been created here. It has been implemented. It was dominant till 2000, but after that, there has been a change in the direction of innovation policy making. It's like a transformative change which is happening, and currently whatever the policies are made in the in many countries which actually takes this particular form, and also the new science, technology and innovation policy of DST, they are talking about some of these important issues. So I'll just touch upon that in some later slides. So let us understand what is the phase one innovation for growth. So it is a linear model, R&D driven product development. It has a socio-technical system directed towards mass production and consumption, which I already told. Commercialization through technology push. So if it is a technology push, then you create a technology and try to sell it. But will the market take it or not? It's a question. So it's prone to market failure. An example I give, like I have written here, the CFC, chlorofluorocarbon, is a technology which was very popular when the refrigeration business. Till the time it actually hit, it was found that it actually depletes the ozone layer. So suddenly what happened? It actually vanished from the market and it was replaced by other technologies. So this innovation had a market failure. So innovation, what we think today, if we create an innovation, if we think that it will not have a market failure, it's wrong. It may have a market failure if it doesn't take into consideration certain things like what is the cost to the environment or cost to the society. Now all these in this phase, the policy instruments are aimed in to stimulate the R&D in business, because I told it's a linear model and R&D driven. So you give tax concession, direct subsidies to push this particular R&D and create innovation. Okay, so there are some challenges in this particular phase. So if we divide the countries into developing high income countries, developing low income countries and developed high income countries, we see in developed countries the investment uh, they invest high into R&D in this growth phase. Like in 1670s, they invested very high in R&D. They derive the principal benefit out of these R&D projects and innovations. They have a high absorptive capacity and infrastructure, and also they have a very low technical convergence with the lower income countries, and they are protecting the scientific and technological knowledge. So this actually created a deprivation or in the developing countries for scientific and technological knowledge, because the technology or the knowledge doesn't flow, it's sticky. So it actually created a growing economic disparity in the system, which is uneven economic growth, this kind of system and innovations. And it, as I told, less focus on social and environmental impact. We didn't care about the environment and social system, and we went on doing innovation and creating new products. So what is the policy response which came out of this? The policy response which came in, suppose one is import substitution. In Latin America, the Argentina, Brazil in 50s to 80s, they did it. We saw in East Asia, Japan, they did a catch up where they invested in R&D and tried to catch up with the West. And we see some other Asian countries also did this. Then there was a search in the academic field also for the new innovation paradigm, or another innovation system which can actually help individual nations to reduce foreign dependency and exploit local capacity. So next we will talk about this phase 2, which is the national innovation system. So it was thought that this system can actually help the disparity that we talked before between the higher income countries and lower income countries. So it is a shift from the linear model to an interactive model. Why interactive? Because more focus on relation between different organizations within maybe a country and learning among the actors. Then less focus on funding on pre-competitive R&D, because that is mostly done in the phase 1. Required improved project governance, because there were a lot of actors which were present and the governance became very complex. And that actually created certain innovation agencies into different countries. And if you now go to different countries and search for innovation, you will actually see these innovation agencies which are present. And they actually coordinate and do this governance part and help these actors within the national innovation system to coordinate between each other and create innovation. So creation of networks between industrial research and university research is also a part of this national innovation system phase. So there are other two approaches which also we can touch upon when we talk about national innovation system. Is cluster policy approach. We all know what is clusters, like some industry of similar in the similar sector and ancillary industries come together, interact, share knowledge, and create innovation. We see it in different parts of the world. Silicon Valley, I mean, although it started long, but actually the concept were understood at a later part. Then we have also in India, Bangalore, which is an IT cluster. So this comes with this national innovation system interactive kind of a model. Then there is a triple helix model, which increasingly intertwine nature of government, industry, and university research. And in this particular model, also we saw that many universities across the world, they started, going with the premise that universities should become more entrepreneurial, foster new company formation through spin-offs, and license technology produced through university research. So that was actually seen in different parts of the world. So, but this national innovation system or phase 2 was also had its own issues. So what are the issues? There are many issues, but I just focus on some of them which are important. So let's focus on social and environmental challenges. Still, we are not focusing on these two issues which are extremely important. The network effect limited to specialized agencies and departments. That means in a national innovation system, when there are few agencies which were pretty active and consultation happens only between those institutions. So there is no general feedback taken from other actors within the system. So this is a drawback, and it needs to be rectified. So, and also it is prone to system failure, because if the actors within the national innovation system doesn't talk with each other, or they don't, that doesn't share knowledge, so then it is prone to system failure. So with this challenge, there were the policy response which came, and these policy response were focused on inclusive, frugal, grassroots innovations. In India, these are very important, and we are probably doing very good in these innovations. Then there were policy focus on environmental, social, economic impact of technology. I don't know how much in India it is prevalent, but we will also see some of these mission-oriented innovation policies where they take care of environmental and social aspects. There's a focus on SDG goals, which came into effect around 2015, and the innovation policies which started directing towards achieving these goals for different countries. And as we go move forward, I think most of these policies will actually talk about it. So there is a the policies are focusing on the transformative change, which is the phase 3. So this is the phase 3. It is really complex because it actually has the characteristics of both these phases, but adds this new dimension. So what are the characteristics? It is multiple actors, inclusive, collaborative, directional, sustainable. It has a strong governance and sometimes political influence, because if you want to change the direction of a particular policy paradigm, you need to have participation from a larger audience, and where you need to have a strong governance and political influence. So it is important to have it. Now, align with other policy frameworks, because one STI policy will not be able to cater this kind of a transformational or directional shift. So policy in finance, education, social aspects, local policies, all needs to be covered, and their targets needs to also be assessed. Then it would also require a new knowledge base, like interdisciplinary studies like sustainability, governance, technology, history. So this has to be done in the university system if we really want to get the best out of these kind of innovation policy paradigm. Along with the economic and innovation studies, which was anyway there before also in other phases, but here along with that, the new interdisciplinary studies needs to be added. It combines technology R&D and social experimentation. It's extremely important, because if we don't take the social feedback, we cannot probably create these policies in a very strong way. And also, it stimulates the mission-oriented innovation policy. I think some of you and are familiar with mission-oriented innovation policies, which are there if you are doing some research. So we'll see some of these two examples of this. So which I feel very very pertinent, and we can look into that. And so this transformation is a socio-technical system. I spoke about it. So it means the co-production of social, behavioral, and technological change in an interrelated way. So it is nothing in silos. It is all interacting. Okay. So let us take an example of Japan, because Japan has gone through all these three phases. The first, when they started their innovation after World War II, they were also focused on the phase 1, which is investment in science and technology. They focused on innovation policy and specific industry sector and targeted areas. Their focus was to catch up with the US. So they actually put a lot of money there, and they successfully did it, and they became the leader. And after they became the leader, then their policy shifted. The direction shifted, and they went towards more NIS oriented approach, where they built their institution in a much stronger way. They made them more powerful by giving them authorities to fund also some of these projects, which actually made them very strong. And also they started funding the basic research, because that gives them the technological edge when creating absolutely something new to the world kind of an innovation. From 2010 or maybe a little bit before 2010 till now, there has been again a shift for the phase 3, which is towards solving environmental and societal challenges for Japan. It's an aging population, had a lot of natural calamity, they faced it, so they are seriously looking into this. And now, if you look into Japan, they are actually talking about Society 5.0 vision, which is aligned with the SDG goals. It's in their the basic plan, which is the 5th basic plan. So it is very important to see how they are actually transforming their policy paradigm. So let me just quickly tell you the characteristics of the mission-oriented innovation policy. Maybe some of you know this, but it is important to understand. So the first is the several stage. It actually takes care of all the stages of innovation from idea to market. So it's an end-to-end kind of a solution, and it uses various policy instruments, whatever it can be of any size, supply side, demand side. It takes into account various other policies other than science and technology, which are important to create this directional shift. It is extremely targeted, and it has a defined time frame. So they have created a time frame by which they have to end these projects to have this kind of a, innovation paradigm. So what are the dimensions of it? The strategic orientation talks about creation of that, the theme or the goal for these kind of policy. And then the policy coordination, which is done by certain actors. So they coordinate these, they create the environment where you can actually implement the project. And then comes the policy implementation part, where you have the implementing partners like the university or the industry, or the R&D institutions, which come and actually implement the projects. So we'll take one example. I'll spend a little bit time to explain to you. So this is a moonshot research development in Japan. Well, I found this is very important because, and I have, when I was in Japan, I actually visited the Osaka University and actually heard about it from their professors who actually were part of some of these projects. So it was very fascinating. So let's see how it works. So you can see at the top level here, they have a big, strategic plans, 5-year plan, annual plans. Out of that, they created 3 target areas which are of very high level of abstraction. So from there, they converted that into 13 visions, which you can see here in a triangle, which again converted into 25 examples or goals. So which is here. And then out of these 25, they selected 7 as moonshot goals, and they want to achieve it with a long time frame, leading up to 2040. I don't know whether you can see it, but it says 2040 to 2050 they have to achieve these goals. So these goals are very important, and just I have listed down these goals for you to understand how these goals are. Like, it talks about human beings can be free from limitation of body, brain, and space, ultra early disease prediction, AI robots act alongside human beings, sustainable resource circulation, to recover the global environment, then sustainable global food supply, fault tolerant universal quantum computer. Then also they have a goal on, I think, on the health. It is sustainable medical and care system to overcome major diseases. So now you can see they have actually created these goals taking into account not only technology but also societal issues and environmental issues. So it is extremely important to understand how they are formulating their policies here. Once they do it, they actually assign for each moonshot goal one project director and give them a portfolio of project. Each project in a portfolio is taken care by one project manager who implements it. Now, in the coordination part, they have created a moonshot strategy council. Now, there is a unique feature of this particular council, because this council actually brings 7 people from different background, from science, arts, literature, media, and all these. They are eminent people. So they actually give the thought to create these, the moonshot goals. So you can understand how these moonshot goals have been created through an elaborate process. So it is extremely important. And not only that, they have actually periodically take feedback from the general population to get their aspiration and their thoughts also, while they formulate these moonshot goals. So you can see a total 360-degree approach they have taken. Now you can see in the implementation part, these agencies, as I told you before, they actually come and implement these goals with the project manager. Good part is, suppose a project fails, a project here fails in the portfolio, what happens to that? Suppose a project fails, it is actually evaluated through a stage gate model. and if it passes, it goes towards achieving the moonshot goal. If it fails, it spins off out of the system and it is taken by other actors in the system and implemented. So nothing is a waste for them. So it's a nice way of capturing the value of your innovation. So it is very interesting to see. The second one I want to talk about is similar, but it is in Europe. It is in Norway. So Norway has a issue of they have a goal. SDG goal is that they want to be carbon neutral. These Nordic countries are very much on the environment and sustainability front. They are very strong. So they have created a project which is carbon capture and storage. So they take the carbon dioxide which is generated out of their oil extraction, because Norway extracts oil and gas. So out of that, whatever comes out, they store it in one of their Norwegian continental shelf as in some way it's like a geological formation. So to do that, they want to create technologies and want to be champion in that particular field, because they know in the future this is going to be a very important part. So what they have done is, again the big strategy, they created and they finalized the objective. Then the program plan they have created here, and you can see the two implementation bodies. One is Gasnova, which is part of the Ministry of Petroleum, and then RCN is Research Council of Norway. So they do the all the coordination and call for proposal. Whatever the project is filed by the anybody can file probably within Norway to if they have the technology. Then they create again the portfolios of project and implement it. And these are the bodies which implement it. The Secretariat and the Program Board of Climate, they actually do the over they see overview the whole process, and these two agencies, they implement it. So here you can see it is a total overall policy approach by which they are going to achieve a goal within next 6 years. They want to be carbon neutral. So if they don't do this kind of a project, it is very difficult to do this kind of achieve these goals. Okay, so now when we saw these policies of the West and probably of some Far East, let us see what the government of India is doing in terms of science and technology policy. Are we aligning ourselves in these phases? Are we updating ourselves? Yes, we are, which is very encouraging. If you go through this STI policy, you can see there are different chapters which are listed, and if you go into each chapter, you can actually relate all the attributes which I discussed in some form. You can see this equity and inclusion. This is a kind of a chapter which talks about the phase 3. Then in chapter 3, probably there is a mission orientation. It talks about mission orientation. So it's pretty good to see that the policies that we are making now and the government is making now, which is actually aligning with this shift in policy, innovation policy transition. What I did is I took one quotation from the STI policy. Now you see I have underlined this. Why? It talks about new challenges today necessitates a different policy making approach. So they are talking about changing the direction of the policy making here. Such policy must adequately prioritize and strategize across the STI landscape in alignment with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. All policies that we are going to make should be aligned with this particular Sustainable Development Goals. This is in the draft policy, STI policy. It talks about short-term mission mode projects along with long-term ones. We discussed this before, how it works. So this policy also talks about it. So we have to get into a policy paradigm and creation of specific, policy frameworks by which we can actually achieve these targets. Okay, so I have spoken about policy. So now let's look into, I'll briefly touch upon the collaborative R&D part. Now, the R&D is a part of an innovation system, but because this lecture also talks about collaborative R&D, so there are a few aspects I would like to capture here for the benefit of the participants. So the first is the advantages. We all know this, but I have just listed it in a very concise form, which is the access advantage, access to complementary resources and access to knowledge. Second is the network advantage, economies of scale and scope you can get out of these networks. Risk sharing you can get out of these networks. Then saving transaction cost and reducing R&D cost are two cost advantages that you have. There are other advantages also, but these are, one of the important advantages that you have. It is not without its challenges. The challenges are undefined, uncertain outcomes. Obviously, you are doing an R&D and the outcome is uncertain, so you have to take care of it. Joint governance, different players are actually merging and collaborating. So if we do, the policy doesn't focus on the governance part, I think it is missing something here. Absence of a prior benchmark, obviously it's a new thing, so benchmark would not be there, so we have to really think about this, how we have to tackle this issue. Sharing of IPR, if we don't tackle this in the beginning, it is going to be a nightmare at the end for any kind of collaborative R&D. Then trust between partners is important. Over the time it builds, so it is not in a short-term project. You see projects are getting project failed because the partners doesn't match, so they doesn't trust each other. You can, in India, you can see the industry doing short-term project with academia may fail because these are two different kind of bodies which doesn't trust each other intrinsically. So you have to give them time to create this kind of environment of trust. Then I'll just talk about some of the attributes for policy. This has to have a focus in the policy of collaborative R&D. One is the clear defined objective and purpose. So no hollow collaboration means you should not have a motive only to just take the resources and the funding for in the sake of collaboration. No. Then you have to look into the long-term and stable commitment of resources by all partners and the government if they are involved. Inclusion of educational objective. This is an interesting thing. So if we align and we involve the academia into an R&D collaborative projects, also the students, they can, if they come out and we offer them certain degrees like PhDs and masters out of a collaborative project, it actually have an positive effect for these kind of R&D collaboration. And maybe we need certain amount of research in this particular area, but whatever projects has been created, it has a positive effect. So we should take this into account. Then characteristics of participants. So the two collaborative bodies which come together needs to choose their partner in a right way so that they complement each other, and they should have some experience of collaboration. So it's not a very very new thing for them, so that then there is a chance for failure. Then clearly defined exit points, extremely important. Strong project management, we have discussed about it. Governance is a big area we need to focus. Strong brand image building, this attracts the best talent for any collaborative R&D space. Sensitive evaluation of progress, this is important because in an R&D project, the timing of evaluation is important because you achieve certain goals at certain point of time. Any kind of R&D, the final outcome comes at a much later stage. But in the process, during you do the project, if you don't put a checks and balance in between and don't evaluate, you may go in the wrong direction. So that needs to be prevented. Then transparent IPS sharing agreement is a must because whatever is an outcome and whatever is intellectual property should have an agreement, like who will have what kind of share in that. So if I look into a policy or a scheme, I would look for all these attributes in that particular policy to evaluate whether this is in the right direction. Just some examples, I took it from the STI policy, the draft STI policy, and it talks about some of the important projects like visiting advanced joint research, global initiative for academic networks, talks about global resources, and Indian people who are eminent in the global field in these areas, they come and do collaborative R&D with Indian institutions. So it's a big area. There are a lot of bottlenecks here, but we need to actually do some kind of a research here to see how we can create a good model by which we can actually implement it. Then collaborative research centers, it takes together the industries, MSMEs, and all other ecosystem players. It's a good platform. It's a good direction. then it talks about long-term ongoing collaboration, which is good because long-term gives a good trust building between the stakeholders. Then the advanced mission in innovation research ecosystem program. Now see these things which are given in the policy document: achieve greater socioeconomic self-reliance. So the socioeconomic is an important word. Portfolio based funding. So we saw in those moonshot research and those MOIPs how the portfolios are working. Then collaborative, mission oriented, long term investment. So you can see the direction is all there. So it's only time that we actually understand this and create the right policy for this, or maybe the vehicles for this to get the benefit out of these policies. So before I end, I know that I think you had a discussion on Gita. I mean, maybe in the last session or something. But I want to point Gita here because Gita is something which is a real example having a success story within India in collaborative R&D space. And we have to study this particular vehicle, special purpose vehicle, much more to understand why this success and what are the chances of failure. So as you already know this, I'll not go into, but it helps in managing government funds. It helps Indian companies to find global partners for R&D, and also it delivers commercializable products and for services for the Indian and global markets. The good part of this is the risk mitigation, because the funding is divided into 4 parts: 25% from government, 25% from partner country, 25% from Indian industry partner, and 25% from foreign industry partner. Even more better is that institutions like education institutions can collaborate with in these projects and be part of it, and also take share of the IP. So this is a very good model which I thought that I'll just touch upon, and I'll just mention this so because this is important. So well, I think I have short my time. It's now I think I'll stop here, and if there are any question I can take it up. And thank you for your patience hearing. Hope you get some point out of this. Thank you.
Once again, thank you, Dr. Jeepak Das Gupta, for giving us your time and just delivering such thought-provoking thoughts to us. We can see that how much of our audience is interested to know all these things. Thanks once again. So I'll move to our coordinator, Professor Nirmala. Over to you, ma'am.
First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Das Gupta for such a wonderful lecture, and you started in a very simple way, talking about innovation in a layman's language. That was very good for all the young researchers who are sitting there, and also how it has evolved. You talked about 3 points where and the difference between that in the beginning of in the 40s, and how it has changed. Yes, it is really changing, but there's still a lot to do, and also to take a variety of societal and environmental challenges. Now, because of the sustainable development goals, there is a lot of emphasis upon, and many points are raised in the 17 goals, and also you talked about interdisciplinary studies, which is also a key point which should be taken up. And one of the reasons why, and between developed countries and developing countries, the lot of difference you pointed out, and still we are improving, but still I feel that there is still a gap between the technologies developed in the research institutions and institutes, where researcher, just like which Dr. Natasha, she said, she has the technology, but there is no hand holding. Like in developed countries, in the institute themselves, there is hand holding. The researcher has to just give the idea, and there is a legal system, there is industry lined up. So it's a very easy passage which has been already formulated in the system. So in the Indian system, because we are in the academic institute, sometimes we find it very difficult, and we also talked about a trust between the industries. So a lot needs still to be done, but hopefully with the coming of the STIP policies, things may, and I think people are becoming much more aware compared to 20 years back. So we always look up for a bit better future, and hope more collaborations will happen, and the industry and academia linkage should be strong. So it's just working together in collaboration. And so thank you very much for all the points you have discussed with us. And as Dr. Radhika said, that we are very happy that we are in the advisory committee, and we can discuss many things, because our center is working on the policy matters. And whenever, because you are in the industry, you know a lot more about how the system works. And so probably we will again come back to you and have discussions. So I also thank all the faculty members, the researchers, students who have been also there. And your lecture gave a lot of enthusiasm, and we had a lot of questions. And I thank also my staff, Dr. Radhika, Dr. Shiraz, Dr. Mamta Bhardwaj, Riddhi, and all, and Santosh also, because we work as a team, and that is how we are able to do successfully the events and programs. So I end up here, and thank you again, and we will connect with you very soon.